Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of the School Safety Free Period. I'm Amanda Klinger.
And I'm Dr. Amy Klinger.
And we're with the Educators School Safety Network. This is the School Safety Free Period, our weekly, hopefully, usually, if we do it on time, weekly podcast or YouTube live stream where we talk about what's happening in school safety, what we're observing in the field, trying to answer questions that we get from educators and school leaders just like you. And then sometimes if we get all of our work done, we have a little bit of fun, and that's where the free period part comes from.
So don't stay home from school waiting for the live stream to come on. You can watch it anytime.
Yeah, there you go. The podcast will come right delivered to you however you normally get podcasts. And since we
don't wait by the phone.
Yeah, we are not professional YouTubers, so we are not quite on the schedule of some of your Mr. Beast people who are making millions of dollars off of YouTube, which is a cultural commentary for another day.
But it is the free period, which just like your free period in school is a time to do a little bit of conversation, a little bit of venting, a little bit of professional development, a little bit of collegial sharing, and all that good stuff kind of rolled into one.
So, everybody, mostly people are back to school. I know I believe the state of Michigan is not legally allowed to go back to school until after Labor Day, but we've been doing a lot of
back. But you think they're sneaking back to school? You make it sound like they're going to school under the cover of darkness to avoid the law.
I believe that their state legislature has protected the tourism industry in that state by not allowing people to go back to school until after Labor Day. But we have been doing a lot of back to school PD for all kinds of schools all over the country. So a lot of people are heading back to school. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about what we've observed and sort of what we've been hearing from folks in the field while we've been doing that back to school PD, and to talk a little bit about what we can do to work to improve safety in our schools this school year.
Actually, I was talking with our research assistant this morning, and she indicated that there's been a lot of bomb threats so far this school year, which is not what I would have anticipated she would say. So we'll see how that goes. Tragically, there has been a shooting already at an athletic event, which was a trend we have seen the last few years. So clearly there's some conversation to be had there about what can we be doing in athletic events that is not just the presence of more security and law enforcement, although clearly that is an approach that needs to be looked at and that needs to be integrated with perhaps an approach about conversations with students, making people accessible at the event that they could talk to or disclose if something is happening. And then maybe, I guess, a much more unrealistic notion is to sort of, maybe we could just take the temperature down a tad bit in all of these kind of events. This particular event was 2 parents in the stands. And we do see that where a number of the incidents last year were also involving not students. So if we go to supervise these after school events and we're focusing only on those darn kids misbehaving, maybe we need to broaden the scope of what we're looking at in terms of community members, parents, and other people sort of, having to be looped into our violence prevention efforts.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. A lot of times when we do professional development, especially with new administrators or people who are sort of on a leadership path, that there is sort of that default of if we're concerned about violence, we need to be concerned about our students, right? Our students are the perpetrator. I think it sort of tends to fall into either it's this outside shadowy boogeyman figure who's going to attack us, or it's going to be one of our students perpetrating, potentially lower level violence. But I think that's a really good thing to consider, our other community members and parents and visiting parents when we're doing, athletic games or other sort of, events where we're holding our school out a little bit more open to the public. And I think that's a little bit more of a difficult, obviously educators are well versed in supervising students. It's a little bit of a different skill set to be able to de-escalate with adults, maybe adults you don't know that well, adults you do know very well. And it's a little bit of a dicier thing because it's maybe feels like maybe it's not your place. But on the other hand, an out of control adult has an impact on your students, and so when you're having events like this, and so that's a little bit of a tougher. It's a little bit of a minefield for educators and leaders.
Well, I also think there is a tendency to have quote unquote big varsity events be like heavily staffed and supervised. But then when we have, a 7th grade volleyball game, there's nobody around. There's no, administrator or person in authority in sight. So I think looking also at the level of supervision and the procedures that you follow, should they really be that different for the big game on Friday night versus a minor athletic event on a Thursday early evening? Clearly there's some differences there, but if there are safety concerns, there probably are safety concerns at both of those events. It's just more about scaling up or down the response, but having the capability to respond in both of those events instead of just making the assumption that the only problem is going to be this larger event, even though statistically that's probably the case. But so that's one of the ones that I think has kind of struck me. The other one is
before you move on, I think you raise a really good point about the scaling up and scaling down. Obviously your homecoming football game with packed stands has different concerns than a small, much smaller school or a much smaller event. But I think the concern is that sometimes we have this big response for big events, and then for smaller events we have nothing. We have no one who's actually in charge. That person has never received any training or doesn't have any communication capabilities. And so I think it sounds like what you're advocating for, that I think makes a lot of sense, is not that we treat both of those incidents or both of those events exactly the same, but that we have like a reasonable floor of preparation and supervision and capabilities, that no matter how small the event is, if we have students here and we have people who are using the facility, that we have some common understanding of what is at least our most basic capabilities. And it has to be some. It can't be, oh well, it's chess club and there's 4 kids, so no one knows where anyone is, no one can help, there's no communication because it's only 4 kids, and to make sure that we have a floor there.
Well, and there are these commonalities among all those events, the visibility factor of, can I find the individuals who are in charge? The communication factor, do I have a mechanism by which I can communicate? The access control factor of, where are people supposed to be and not supposed to be within the facility or the area? But I think the visibility one, there is something between just everybody that's, here, the staff supervising just goes and sits in the crowd and hopefully you can find them. And then there's something between that and like you have to wear like a neon vest so you look like a crossing guard. I have seen schools where they buy, athletic type wear for the people that are supervising, but it's very distinct and it's very uniform. And it becomes very obvious very quickly as you scan the crowd who the people are that are in authority, even though they're not, wearing security stuff or anything like that. So I think those are conversations that would be really worth having, regardless of whether it's an elementary or secondary setting.
You know what would be cool? You talk about that it's athletic wear and it's not a safety vest, but it's still very visible. Maybe you don't know this, but like a lot of soccer teams that they'll have like a home kit and an away kit, and then they have like a third jersey, and they're like wild, like highlighter colors and pink and whatever. That'd be really cool. You could have like your like highlighter color that is like looks cool with your school's colors.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
maybe I just want one of those. Maybe that's what's happening, because I think it would be cool to have.
That's an investment, and I think that's a way of designating people who are in authority without making them feel like
it's a punishment.
They're a crossing guard standing there on duty, but yet making them easily visible, especially if everyone is wearing those same sort of things. And even emergency responders and other people can find them very quickly. So I don't know.
And I think that's a really good segue into, I think, the next thing we want to talk about, of like systematizing some of this work. And I think that's something that we talk about a lot of. It's one thing to know what our best practice is in terms of school safety. It's an entirely other thing to make those things happen. And, what you talk about of what we need is people to be visible and to be easily ascertainable of like who is the person who is helpful or who's the person who's in charge. And the way that you operationalize that is to make them visible to your eye, but then also to incentivize that. So having like cool athletic gear that designates me as a person who is here in an official capacity is a lot more likely to have success than here, where this ill-fitting, ugly crossing guard outfit, because you didn't really even want to be here assigned to this duty anyway, and now this thing is like feels more like a punishment. So do you want to kind of speak to that? I know you want to talk about kind of systematizing this and like, understanding, dominoes of failure.
Well, I don't really want to talk about the apparel per se, but I do think that we have this assumption that when something happens, you'll know who to talk to, and you won't.
Yeah.
I've seen supervision at drop-off, at parent drop-off, where it's dark, in the winter, and you can't tell who is the teacher versus another parent. They're wearing, a coach, can't see their ID. They're not wearing anything reflective. They're not wearing anything distinctive. So I think there is a whole conversation that can be had about how do we provide people with the tools they need to do these kind of systems of supervision or systems of accountability. I think there's ways that we can be a little more creative and a little more accommodating if we really thought it through, as opposed to, well, this is what we always do. Just go stand out there. Just go stand there and wait for a parent to ask you, as opposed to what is the perception of the parents? How do they see it? What do the kids see? What can't we see? What do emergency responders see? And unfortunately, many times that doesn't rise to a level of attention until after you've had multiple failure points where somebody goes, oh, we should have thought of that. And that's, I guess, one of the things that I think is very, this is a good time to look at it going back to school, is what do we have these kind of dominoes of, I call them sort of this dominoes of failure, where it doesn't matter if, let's say, dismissal doesn't have to go perfect, but that doesn't mean, but we have got to have a point where we stop having these failure points. So kid gets on the wrong bus, not the end of the world, but the kid gets on the wrong bus, the driver doesn't notice, and then nobody knows where the kid is. And then we have all these dominoes that accelerate. And there was one just I think yesterday or the day before, of where 2 5-year-olds got off at the wrong stop. Nobody noticed. They have the little tags that show where they're supposed to get off. Nobody checked the tags. The driver didn't know what the names of any of the stops were or where any of the streets were. So when the parent couldn't find the child, they couldn't even backtrack to try to find that. And so you had failure points, on the part of the driver, on the part of, a whole bunch of different failure points. Finally, to the point where these kids are 5 years old and it's 105 degrees in wherever they were was very, very hot. And they're ringing doorbells trying to get someone to help them find their moms. And so, there's a lot of failure points to get to that in terms of training for kids and support for kids and checking those things. And all of those new systems, to your point, take some time to get used to, but they have to have stops where we stop all the dominoes of failure from accelerating. Probably the most graphic domino of failure is in Uvalde, in terms of the most horrific and tragic, where there's just multiple failures. But when you look back at the events that really make it into the media or that really undermine people's trust, or, in this case with these 2 5-year-olds, no one was hurt, but clearly it's a PR disaster, a traumatic event for those kids and families, lots of other anxiety on the part of other people with 5-year-olds on buses.
Right.
And so these multiple failure points, somebody has got to be the domino that doesn't fall. And the way you do that is by creating systems so that there are these different checkpoints and places where we can stop the failure points from continuing.
Yeah. I mean, I know we talk a lot about redundancy in specific functions and roles, and I think that certainly helps. if I'm supposed to do this and I'm not able to for whatever reason, that we have, redundancy, that someone knows that they have to step up and fill that role or that duty. But I think it's good to think of both redundancy and then also kind of what you're talking about of the domino that doesn't fall, of, not just redundancy in people, but redundancy in capabilities, or that, that we have sort of like, you think of, in different systems design, that you have, here's the way that it's typically supposed to work. And if this thing doesn't work, this thing automatically is there. This thing already is kicked in. This thing isn't in place. And stuff that doesn't require affirmative work from somebody. It's one thing to go, oh, something went wrong, I have to do something. But instead that there's the way that I normally do things is such that it can be a catch for if something else fails. And I think that's, it's one thing it's kind of like the difference between like having a generator at your house that you have to like go out, start, put gasoline in, and then try to run things, versus those like whole home generators that are more automated. And I guess it's kind of trying to think of what are the like automatic, fail safes that we can build in that are just, this is a thing that I'm always doing. I don't have to know that something is wrong for me to start doing this thing. It's just, this is something that I'm always doing, and it can be a fail-safe, sort of a stopping point for things.
Yeah, I think though sometimes the domino that doesn't fall is the person that went with their gut when, what was that? And they check, as opposed to, what was that? It's probably fine.
Yeah.
So overcoming the normalcy bias of, it's probably fine, without descending into like total panic, is when that domino doesn't fall. Oftentimes somebody is, has some situational awareness, or there's something doesn't seem right, and they go with it, as opposed to, I'm so busy, I have so much to do, I have so many things on my plate. And that really speaks to what you're talking about here, of where you have sort of this underlying predisposition towards thinking about safety, accountability, violence prevention, as opposed to, we just do our thing and we are rushing around frantic all the time because we're so busy with so many things. And as opposed to like, hold up, stop for a second, pause for a minute. And I think that's where a lot of these that you see, very low level events, typically, you're not going to read in the media about the first domino fell and then somebody caught it. You're not going to read that. You're going to read about the ones where everything has fallen. And I'm sure that anybody listening to this podcast can think of instances where you go, whew, I'm so glad we caught that. Yeah, because that was the domino that didn't fall.
Yeah. I think one thing that you said kind of at the beginning of this discussion that I think is really valuable is that we're not going for perfection, that it's okay if one or two dominoes fall. That's just like a Tuesday, right? I mean, the nature of education, the nature of having that many people together in one spot is that there will be failure points. There will be dominoes that fall. And I think that's a really helpful way for people to think about that. We're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for a kid never gets on the wrong bus. We're not looking for there's never anything that goes sideways ever. What we're looking for is that we have the capability, that we've built the systems that when
safeguard.
When one thing goes wrong, that the whole thing doesn't collapse, that one thing goes wrong and we're able to catch it and we're able to correct it and we're able to solve for that.
I think that is a little bit of what happened in the pandemic is, you had all these new things that you started doing, in terms of masking or, visitors or not visitors or, all these different things. But the system was never built. It was just sort of like, this is just what we do. It doesn't make any sense, but we're doing it because we have to do this one thing. And we, when you don't have a system and there aren't these stopgaps, that's why I think you saw more and more of those failures during that time. And now that we're pivoting back to a more quote unquote normal sort of educational experience, we have to rebuild the systems that got disrupted. And we've seen a lot of schools last year that were just reacting all the time because they hadn't, to extend our metaphor, they hadn't set the dominoes up yet. And I think that's the systems that you're talking about, is putting those dominoes in place and getting that system with the redundancy and the fail safes. And that's any kind of a system for visitor sign in, for accounting for students after a fire drill, for arrival, dismissal. What do we do in an accident? What do we do? And some of the stuff is just almost daily operational stuff in terms of access control or engaging with people when they come into the building. So there's these like mini systems that form this big system.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you mentioned that's really critical for people to keep in mind is that you talked about taking a pause and going, hold on, something about this is not working. We had one or two dominoes fall, and luckily we avoided something catastrophic. How can we build back system? How can we build back fail safes into this? And I think one thing that you always kind of talk about, especially to aspiring school leaders, is that the power of going, hold on just 1 second. I need to reflect on this more, or I need to check with something, or I need to do a bit of research. And I think that's a really powerful frame for future leaders. But I think in terms of school safety, there's a lot of pressure. Well, we have to have all of these procedures in place. School started. Those are the procedures, and we're going to live with them for the rest of the year, whether they're good or not. And I think it's really powerful to be able to go, listen, this is what we thought the procedure was, and we have identified some concerns. We've identified potential failure points. And so here's how we're going to modify this, and here's how we're going to change that and adapt it and make it something that works. And I think that educators respond very well to that, because from leaders, educators really respond to that, because that is indicating, I'm not infallible, I'm not perfect, and I'm not going to make you suffer through a thing that doesn't work. This is a collaborative, ongoing process of continuous improvement. And so we're going to continue to refine our procedures.
Well, but to go back to our original example with the 5-year-olds off the bus, these 5-year-olds should not have had to go through what they went through in order to discover that the bus driver didn't have adequate training, or didn't know the route well enough, or had not been introduced or integrated into the system to know the students and the stops. Those were dominoes that fell before the 5-year-olds ever got off the bus on the wrong place. So the dominoes of failure had already started because that driver was not equipped to do the most critical thing, which is make sure kids get back to the right place. And so we should not be comfortable or okay with, well, good thing those 5-year-olds pointed out the flaw in our system by being subjected to a traumatic event, but rather we could have diagnosed that before that happened if we were setting up a system that was trying to avoid that situation to begin with.
So sort of proactively trying to identify potential failure points before they are presented to us and when something bad happens.
Well, and some of them are, pretty obvious. I would think and again, I'm not trying to dump on bus drivers because I don't want to do that job. But, I would think one of the most significant things a bus driver needs to do is know what their route is and know what the streets are and where they're going. And I understand, please don't inundate us. I get it. It's hard to find drivers. They're subcontracted. I get it. And the roads and the changes, and I understand all that. And those are all good points. But I just think my point is, we should not wait until the dominoes start falling to go, oh yeah, let's identify now what might not be working. Maybe we need to take, that more proactive approach of what has the potential to not work. Yeah, rather than waiting for 5-year-olds to point it out to us.
So I guess, the homework for people, I know we don't always assign homework here in the free period, but we're doing homework today. So I guess the homework is for people to I would really challenge you to go back to your school, to your specific environment, and sort of look around. What are the potential failure points here? The way that we do arrival, the way that we do dismissal, the way that we have kids moving around the school, the way that I use my classroom space. What are the potential failure points that luckily, hopefully, haven't been revealed to us by a bad thing, and trying to identify those proactively.
And the response is always, well, how would I know failure points? Well, I'm not an electrician, but when I plug in my toaster oven with that frayed cord and go, "Ugh, I hope this works," I'm kind of identifying a potential failure point. So you don't have to be an expert to be able to look at something and go, that doesn't seem like that's a great idea right there.
So we've reached the point of the free period where whoever has stuck around to this point, they've heard all of the important substantive academic discussion. They've stuck around to this point because they either want to show and tell from what you have behind your office, or you can take the option of just to tell us a fun or funny thing that you did or that you have coming up. This is the real free period part. Don't make that face.
Wait, what were my options? Show and tell? I don't want to do...
We did show and tell, I think, last episode. So you can do show and tell again if you want, or you can just tell us something fun or funny that happened last week or that you have coming up. I mean, I have one for you that would be pretty obvious for you coming up, at least.
Okay.
I mean, but you can come up with whatever you like.
Well, I was going to say, which is apropos of none of those things, that as we go back to school, I was having a discussion with someone else about, in the old days, we didn't go back to school so early. And that, my birthday is August 24th, and I never as a kid had my birthday actually during the school year when you would get to do all the fun things that you get to do when your birthday is in the school year. But yet by August 24th now, lots and lots of schools are in session. And then that led to another old timer discussion of, which I think is interesting. I never in my entire career ever worked in a school building that was air conditioned. And, here in Ohio, it still gets hot. And I just was having that discussion with somebody earlier today about, the going back to school, and you have what did she call it? I forgot. False fall, and then you have second summer, at least in Ohio, where, the weather fluctuates. And we were talking about that. And so I guess that was my takeaway for today is how the world has changed. But there's probably a lot of folks still in the field right now who remember when, it was very different. So we act like nothing ever changes in education. I just think that was an interesting observation.
That is an interesting observation. And you got to kind of do your birthday during the school year. Kind of. No. As an administrator, I did occasionally. But you know what they don't do when it's your birthday in school and you're grown up? Nothing.
None of the fun stuff.
None of the fun stuff. Yeah. Well, my fun and funny thing is not at all related to schools. So now it seems out of place because yours was related to schools still. So... now you're making me look bad. Mine was just going to be that there's a new Star Wars show on Disney Plus, and it's not very good, but I love it. I'm having a grand time watching it, and so I sit and.
So you're hate watching it?
No, I'm not hate watching it. I like it. I'm just it's not like.
Well, if it's not very good and you like it, then I guess you got not very good taste, or you've lowered your expectations.
I only like it because it's Star Wars. And there's lots of things that you're like, ooh, I know what they're talking about. And that's the part of Star Wars that I know that you hate, the inside knowledge part.
So if you wrapped a Brussels sprout in Star Wars something, everybody would eat it? Is that what you're saying?
I like Brussels sprouts just generally, so that's not the best example. I'm just saying there's Star Wars shows that are so good that I recommend them to people whether you care about Star Wars or not. This one is not of that quality. I'm enjoying it a lot, and my wife is sitting looking at her phone while I watch it, and then when I go and gasp because exciting things happen, and then she's watching me. I think she's watching me watch the show. I think is what's happening.
So this is the portion of the podcast we should call "Cool Story, Bro," because it really is only funny to both of us. But
I mean, I'd love to hear about all of the other Star Wars people out there who are watching Ahsoka. I'd love to hear your hot takes on it.
I don't think there's that many.
Maybe. Could be. Well, thank you for joining us for the school safety free period, the applicable part and the totally not applicable part at the end. But, that's part of what we do here. So If you have any questions, you can always email us, info@eschoolsafety.org. You can always head to our website, www.eschoolsafety.org. We have lots of resources. We have a lot of free resources. We have other things that are not free in our marketplace, but that are very affordable and helpful for folks. We did just release our report about violent incidents and threats in schools for the 22-23 school year. That did just come out. We did a podcast episode on that couple weeks ago, so you can always take a deeper dive and have a look at that. And until next time, thanks so much and stay safe out there.